Hard to lead others if you don't have your own house in order. And a key part of that for all of us is our money. Last week, you heard about corporate budgeting. On this episode, 4 rules to get control of your money from the founder of one of the most popular budgeting systems. This is Coaching for Leaders, episode 356.
Produced by Innovate Learning, maximizing human potential.
Greetings to you from Orange County, California. This is Coaching for Leaders, and I'm your host, Dave Stachowiak. Leaders aren't born, they're made. And this weekly show gives you access to the practical wisdom that will empower you to become a better leader. Last week, you heard about how to create a corporate budget. And you know, if you've been listening to this show for a while, that once in a while, I like to take a step away from the core leadership topics and zero in on a topic that is really important to us as leaders on a personal level, but also just as human beings. And last week's topic got me thinking about the importance of not only putting together a corporate budget, but also putting together a personal budget. And leadership is one of those things that a lot of us, even if we've had some school or classes or training on, we just never learned as much as I think we need to learn. And financial planning and budgeting is probably one of those other topics. We always can learn more. And so today I've called up the person I know who's really the expert on this, who's the creator of the system Bonnie and I use for all of our personal budgeting. And I'm really thrilled to welcome Jesse Mecham to the show. Jesse is the CEO and founder of You Need a Budget, affectionately referred to as YNAB. First released in 2004, YNAB has been on a mission to help people stop living paycheck to paycheck, get out of debt, and save more money. He recently released his book by the same name, You Need a Budget, and it's already hit the Wall Street Journal Bestseller list. Jesse, I'm so glad to talk to you. Welcome to Coaching for Leaders.
Thanks very much, Dave. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, I am so curious about where this started for you. How did YNAB emerge, and why did it emerge for you?
The name came from my wife. I remember distinctly we were sitting in our very tiny apartment. We were both newlyweds with a baby that was maybe 2 months away. So she was sitting there, and I had this idea that if we made a little extra money selling this little budget that I built just for the two of us, because we were, classic kind of broke college students, newlyweds, and we were having to watch our money very closely. And it had been working for us for about a year and a half. And I just thought, well, maybe we could sell this. So I worked on getting it ready. And at the very beginning, it was just essentially a spreadsheet, which I'm sure your listeners are all very comfortable with that idea. And it was a little absurd to think that you could launch a business with just a spreadsheet. But my vision was so small at the time, I just thought, hey, I can make a little extra money and get us through school without having to borrow money and, have my wife be able to stay at home with the baby. And that was what she really wanted to do. So she said, why don't you name it You Need a Budget? And I liked that it was kind of assertive and a little bit cheeky. So we went with that and it was born, at that point. It's just been a grind ever since. But we've been in it about 14 years and loving the whole process.
There's a tendency with a lot of the software and apps, and I know, like you said, this started with an Excel spreadsheet, to think a lot about the technology. And the technology is really cool, and you've all created some amazing things. But the thing that's really cool is the principles behind it. And that's actually what I'm really curious about for our audience, is really whether they ever use the system or not, of really getting good at this principle of how to approach budgeting. And I'd love to walk through the 4 rules you have. But even before we get into that, I was reading the book, and one of the things that jumped out at me from the book was what you said about guilt. And you say in the book, if guilt is haunting you, it's one of 2 things. You know in your gut that a bigger priority needs your attention, or you're letting other people's expectations of how you should live your life color your choices. How does that play out in budgeting?
So budgeting is essentially helps you answer that first potential cause of guilt, where you're maybe dealing with a priority that's larger. So I hate using examples during interviews, because then it feels like I'm painting some example as a bad thing. But that's my little disclaimer. So let's say you go to Home Depot and you buy a new power drill, because who doesn't need another one? And then you feel guilty about it later because there's maybe a little bit of an impulse. Nothing wrong with having a power drill, but there's a priority that you're probably not addressing. And budgeting essentially answers that question for you. So if you go in ahead of time and just say, what are the most important things my money's supposed to do? You think about it like strategic objectives. You say, what is our strategic objective here? And we want to make sure we're hitting those first, and then let the other pieces fall where they may. Most people, when they find out they're checking off the big boxes of their big priorities, the other stuff doesn't really move the needle anymore for them. And it certainly doesn't cause any guilt because you're knocking off the big things. And I'm sure your listeners know what it's like to have a good day and a bad day. A good day starts with you deciding what's important for that day, not procrastinating those hard, important things, getting them done. And then when the other things don't get done, for some strange reason, you still feel really productive because you tackled the big stuff first. And budgeting just lets us do that. And then on the flip side, on that second side of things that cause guilt, when you're proactively deciding what's important to you, what are your priorities, other people's voices and comments and things, they start to become very small, very inconsequential, and they won't cause you any harm at that point.
So much of our audience is just like you described. We think about productivity and the importance of doing the most important things first. And for some reason, there's something in a lot of our brains that when we pull up the check register or budget or pay our bills, it all of a sudden goes away, and we don't do that.
I can speak to that for just a moment because there's a strange thing, and it's for highly productive individuals. I find this to happen a lot, where we care a lot about how we use our time. We wake up on time. We have a regimented morning routine. We're exercising. We're efficient. We're listening to a book as we drive in somewhere. We're wizards on our phones, just nailing things. We don't like to have a spare minute we don't fill with something productive. And all of that goes toward making hopefully fantastic incomes and very comfortable livelihoods. Once that time, that efficiency, all of that productivity is poured into this machine that then creates money for you and spits money out the other side, suddenly you don't treat the money the same way. But the money is just a representation of all of that work, all of that efficiency, all of that productivity that you poured in. It's just another representation of all your work. So I would like to see the same conscientious, hyper-focused, very vigilant individual with their time. I would like to see them apply that same hyper-focused vigilance to their money, at the end of the day. And then from there, we can relax once we got those big priorities taken care of.
I mentioned earlier that, the big part of this that I love is the principles, and Bonnie and I have really focused our personal financing around the 4 rules of YNAB. And rule number 1 is give every dollar a job. And one of the distinctions that you make is the distinction between forecasting and budgeting. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, this is good also when we're talking with leaders of organizations, because as a leader of an organization, you need to forecast. You need to be looking at always ahead, sometimes 3-5 years ahead. But in the instance where we want to tell our dollars what they're supposed to do, you only think about what you currently have on hand. And if I could correlate it at all, let's say you've got 5-6 direct reports and they walk into your office, you don't then say, well, if our team was a little bigger, if we had 2 more direct reports, this is what I'd have them do. Hey, everybody on the team, I'm sending off these 2 imaginary direct reports to go do these jobs for us. They'd be like, you lost your marbles,
Mm-hmm.
So we only ever look at who do we have on hand right now? These are the jobs that need to be done right now. With dollars, it's the same way. As soon as you start forecasting, oh man, if we had this money, if we sold this house, you're a realtor, or if we landed this big client, then we would have this money. We start to look at it through these really rosy glasses, and we overstate the income that we'll have, and we understate the expenses, and we end up then just blaming the budget, saying, oh, budgets don't work. And what I want to do is just, you make it finite and fixed and firm, and you say, these are the resources we have on hand right now. What is the most important thing these dollars need to do before new dollars come in? Answer that question, and you will feel this wave of peace come over. Whether it's $300 you have on hand or $30,000, you will feel this clarity that happens when now all of my dollars are off to do what they're supposed to do. You've delegated effectively, and they're doing what they're supposed to do. You'll feel content. And that's really what we're going after. We're going after getting people to be aware of what their money is doing, and then having their money go do those things proactively so that they can find a little bit of peace.
When we first started using the system, this was a real mind shift change for me, and I think Bonnie too. Yeah, and it's not comfortable at the beginning, because if you're used to using like more of the traditional budgeting, the idea that, okay, I've got $10,000 in the checking account and every dollar's allocated to do a job. But after a few weeks, I was like, oh, this makes so much more sense. Don't worry about the future money. And I think you say this in the book, you use today's money to write your future, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You're using today's money to write your future. It's a good line. I still like that line. Some of the other lines you don't like after you write a book, but I do still like that one. And the important thing is, when you're dealing with a finite resource, what we're trying to create, and it sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but we're trying to create scarcity in your thinking. We want you to deal with constraints. Constraints are powerful. Constraints allow us to be extremely creative and think outside the box. And anyone knows, when you time box a project, suddenly the project just fits into that nice box that you gave it. You say, okay, guys, we got 10 minutes to come to a decision. 10 minutes is all it took. And with money, it's the same way. We create that scarcity where we say, this is all the money you have. We know you're going to earn money again in a week or two, or even in 3 days. But we are creating a moment where if you give to this job over here with this money, you can't give as much to that job over here with that money. And those trade-offs, that's where the priorities start to be fleshed out. And it's just an exercise of recognizing what's most important. If you're doing it with a spouse or a partner, it's a fantastic exercise, because both of you are kind of pushing and prodding and pulling at these different priorities and figuring things out together, and learning, honestly, sometimes learning new stuff about this person you've lived with for 20 years. So it's a really fascinating exercise to do together. But the important part is, if you start to bring in, oh, I will make money down the road, you've killed scarcity, because now you have this limitless amount of money, or essentially it just kills the constraint. And we want that constraint there. So you have to do the trade-offs and decide what's really most important to you.
We had a guy in the show a couple of years ago who's the author of a book, Mark Barden, called A Beautiful Constraint. And it's exactly, he's done a bunch of research on the fact
I need to read that.
Yeah, you should, because it's all about how creativity tends to emerge in situations where there's a lot more constraints than if you have every resource available to you. And it's so funny, like exactly the same thing I found when we started doing this process of, once you assign dollars to everything, then all of a sudden you have to make choices, right?
Yeah.
And
I was listening to something the other day, it was just yesterday, where there's these musicians and they create music. Maybe it's per song. They decide what noises they'll use, and they're orchestrating or composing a song made from washing machine noises, which sounds hilarious, And then as they were asked, well, why don't you introduce other noises? It would be so much easier. It'd be easier to compose what you wanted if you brought in, other options. And these composers said, no, quite the opposite. When your options are endless, then you don't create anything. You're frozen. You have too many. It's like, the classic decision fatigue that's been written about, where, what was it, ketchup or mustard flavors? People walk in and suddenly their happiness drops because they have too many choices. So there's a lot there. I got to read that book now that you mentioned. But yeah, I was reminded of the washing machine song. It's easier if you limit yourself to one appliance from which you like to compose music. So I guess we're doing kind of the same thing.
Yeah, indeed. So logistically, whether you do it in the YNAB software or you do it on Excel spreadsheet or wherever, whatever amount of money you got in your account, you allocate those dollars to exactly where they need to go, whether it's groceries or home insurance or whatever. And I think that fits in really well with Rule 2, which is embrace your true expenses. And this was huge for us, because one of the points the YNAB makes is that this is really important for people who've got fluctuating incomes, which we do every month. Every month we have different amounts of money that come in. How does this play out, and why is it so important if you have fluctuating income?
One of the things that as soon as you get really good at giving your money jobs and you're saying, okay, I know what I have on hand and all of it's been deployed, you're doing it right. And then you recognize that there are these priorities that we don't naturally think about because they're too far ahead. And I think we're wired deep down inside to, kind of assess the moment, make sure our life's not in danger and things like that. And so we aren't really equipped super well to look ahead and anticipate. So when we're talking about embracing your true expenses, when you have people list their monthly expenses, they'll say cell phone, groceries, maybe a car payment or things like that. And then we'll say, well, what are you going to go on a vacation? Oh, well, yeah, we go on a vacation every year. We go to, Florida or something. And you're like, oh, okay, well, that's an expense. Do you celebrate the holidays? Do you do Christmas, Hanukkah, anything like that? Oh, yeah, yeah. And, of course we do that, December 25th or whatever. So, well, it's not whatever, it's always that day. But what happens is you're starting to have people recognize that this monthly expense line that they do mental math around a lot when they're, quote unquote, budgeting in their head, it's inaccurate. It understates accurate, actual expenses. And we have expenses like your tires blowing out, your roof caving in. We accidentally left a laundry room sink on the other day. And so we had water it sounded like someone was in the shower in the basement below.
Oh, no.
Water just gushing through. And so you're like, oh my gosh, that stuff like that happens because you're alive. So you just, you deal with it. You've got money set aside for home repairs and things. If you're living, these things will happen. No, there's never been a car tire invented that doesn't wear out. So we can't pretend that yours won't. And as we look ahead and think about that, it's really fun to see how that true expense line, it does climb because now it's taking into account Christmas in 8 months and the vacation in a year and the wedding for the daughter or son in 5 years or however far out you feel like you need to go. But when you do that, then you start breaking them up into monthly amounts. And now you're not just giving priorities to should we eat out tonight or should we go buy that thing or should we pay our electricity bill? Those are all really easy. You're giving priorities to things like, what about the vacation down in Florida in 8 months? Do we want to fund that? It's in lieu of, buying this thing right now. And so you have the future version of you, you have the current version of you, and you have this little discussion deciding, what's most important. Sometimes it's for the future, sometimes it's for the present, but it's up for you to decide. But now you have all the information so you can make really solid decisions because you're thinking about the future obligations, you're thinking about the current obligations, you have scarce resources, your creativity's firing, and you're doing that trade-off between what you really want.
This has been huge for us because I think like a lot of people, we have our fixed expenses every month, but we'd have those things that would come up. And thankfully we've had the blessings to, that has never taken us down, but it's an annoyance. And it's funny you mentioned car tires and things like that. I remember when we first started with YNAB, one of the powerful things of the software is like, you can figure out pretty quickly over a course of years, how much do you on average spend on auto maintenance?
Exactly.
And then we just started setting that aside and assigning those dollars every month, even if we didn't have. And then when, the cars needed new tires, it was like, oh, no big deal. We've already got the amount of money set aside for that because we knew that was going to happen. And one of the things I thought was really interesting is that when you start doing this, a lot of the quote unquote emergencies don't really ever happen anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. You'll find we still will have people save for emergency, an emergency fund. But I noticed just recently in my own finances, and I'm always kind of questioning myself and trying to see if there's a better or more optimal way to do things. And one of the things I noticed was our emergency fund is probably 3 or 4 months worth of expenses. And it just was sitting in the checking account. And I realized we hadn't dipped into that for years and years. And it was because a lot of the things we call emergencies aren't. Car tires blowing out, that is not an emergency. That's something that you've known long ago would happen. Car repairs being needed, home repairs, kids swimming lessons in the summer camps, all sorts of things. Those aren't emergencies. And what we tend to do is we'll throw a big pile of money in a corner and we'll say, that's our emergency fund. And then it's just this revolving door of things you forgot to handle. And what you're losing there is the ability to balance and prioritize and say, okay, this is not just some kind of vague emergency pile. We're saying our money should be there for repairs, should be there for swimming lessons, should be there for the holidays, travel, and all those things. And you're being much more discreet. And you'll feel like it won't be this revolving door of savings because everyone knows this is what happens. Savings goes in, savings goes out. You're like, well, I was saving money, but now I'm not because I had this little hiccup this month, but next month will be better. So you put some savings in, a little hiccup this month, next month will be better. There is no normal month, ever, ever, ever. So when we're thinking about the savings, we want to be very discreet and purposeful, even with that money, and say, what specifically is this for? Because then again, it goes back to that rule, that first rule. Priorities are coming out, and we really want those priorities. We want them fleshed out and dialed in for exactly what you want your life to be like.
And this leads right into the third rule, which is roll with the punches. And one of the things I've heard you say is the mantra, changing my budget is not failing, right?
No, quite the opposite. Yeah. If you're not changing your budget, you're not budgeting, because nobody's clairvoyant. Well, if there is someone clairvoyant out there, you're going to kill it economically, I'm sure.
Yeah. Call us up, by the way.
Exactly. Like I would like to start a hedge fund with you, so we aren't going to be able to do that. So we cannot punish ourselves for not being good guessers at what we will spend. That is the objective of budgeting is not to arbitrarily assign a number to something and then beat yourself up when you did not guess correctly. What we want to do with budgeting is to prioritize and be intentional, and then be aware at how the money is actually flowing against our intentions. But when your intentions change, or when life throws you a wicked curveball, you just have to recognize, oh, my life involves this wicked curveball right now. So we're going to have to adjust. Our first learning with that, when Julie and I were first married, YNAB didn't exist. We were just doing this little spreadsheet all on our own. I distinctly remember we had a funeral, and it was out in Atlanta, and we suddenly had to come up with $500, $600, $700 in airline tickets. And I mean, I guess there was an option where we couldn't drive because we had to be back to school. And I guess we could have not gone, but that wasn't really an option, So we had to move money around in the budget. And back in those days, a $700 hit, it took us several months to kind of, come back around from that and get things all in order again. But that's just life. That was just life. So think of yourself more as a grandmaster chess player, adjusting to your opponent's play, and less like a fortune teller. And I think you'll get a long way with it. It's crazy we had to make a rule saying change your own plan when you want to, but we did.
No, I think it's critical because Dwight Eisenhower, I think we've said on this show before, plans are worthless, but planning is indispensable. And it's so true with this because, and as much as we all know this as leaders, I mean, no one walks into a corporation and has a plan and executes it perfectly. Like, we're always changing our plans, but then we set up the budget in whatever software we use or Excel, and then we go over our dining budget, by whatever amount, and then all of a sudden we're like, oh, this budget stuff doesn't work. Right?
Budgeting doesn't work. Yeah. You're like, no, you just ate more. My word, Good grief, let it go.
Yeah.
So that's it. Yeah, you just adjust to move forward. The budget is always about looking forward and adjusting and proactively planning. Very little of it is about this post-mortem analysis. I mean, I have like 1,000 analogies, having done this for so long, as it relates to changing your mind. Basketball coaches making halftime adjustments and things like that. But yeah, you're just always proactive, looking forward. Like any good leader, you have a handle on the current situation, but you are always looking ahead. It's your job to be looking ahead, and you're the leader of your money, and it's the same old rules.
Yeah, and I think the system allows for that, and I actually really like that you have this as a rule, because you encourage people to say it's okay to change the budget number, because that was the struggle we always had we used Mint before we used You Need a Budget, and the income wouldn't match up, or then the expenses wouldn't match up, and it just became meaningless after a while because we didn't really ever look at the number. But now when something changes, we talk about it and we're like, okay, we're going to take this money out of this bucket and put it into that bucket, and it works.
Yeah, move forward. Yeah. I mean, we've not to talk about the software too much, but in any way that you implemented this, you would want to make the mechanism for moving money very easy. And we've tried to do that. I've thought about, when someone moves moves money, we should fire confetti out of a corner and be like, yay, you're budgeting really well. And they're like, what? I just overspent. You're like, no, you're winning, that kind of thing. So it is really that. If the worst thing they could do is feel like a failure and then quit, then they truly are losing this game.
Yeah.
But if we can have them feel like they're winning when they're adjusting, oh man, they'll be in it for the long haul. That rule is the longevity rule. That rule is what keeps people on the wagon.
Yeah, same with us. Cool. All right. So rule 4, age your money. So this is very prominent in the software of how many days your money has been aged. And I'm always trying to get that number to be higher. What do you mean by age your money?
So it's just it's a metric that we invented that measures, the software does it, but it measures the time elapsed from when you earned the dollar to when that specific dollar is spent again. And we take an average. So it's really just telling you how close to the paycheck to paycheck precipice you stand. If you earn money on Friday, payday, and then it's all gone 2 days later, you're spending money that's on average a day or two old. We would like to get people, and we are getting people to where they're spending money that they earned at least 30 days ago. And as you follow the first three rules, this metric, it just kind of takes care of itself. There's nothing actively to do. It's just a matter of kind of noticing, hey, we're further from that precipice than we used to be. And the beauty of it is your stress drops, which means your health improves. You're sleeping better, which means your health improves. Your relationships improve because things aren't as stressful. The far-reaching effects of having your money be really boring and effective is fantastic. And the age of money it's almost a signal of kind of how boring are things for you, and we want them to be as boring as possible as it relates to money.
Yeah. Before we were doing You Need a Budget, we had our Mint budget, and then we had our Excel spreadsheet on the side because we knew that we needed to in June is home insurance month. So we've got to be setting, and we had a separate account to move money over to that. And it's so funny. This is the first time in our lives, I think for either of us, we literally do not have a savings account. We only have one checking account. And we're doing a better job saving than we've probably ever been, just because it's all tracked in one place, and that it's simple, as far as aging the money, just thinking about that.
Yeah, exactly. And you never look at your bank account balance to determine whether you should spend money. So when someone starts following YNAB, they'll usually, from the start to finish, usually almost 10x their bank account. It would depend a little bit on demographics, but their balance gets much, much larger. And I actually had a chat with a banker one time, and I said, hey, if you had all of your customers use YNAB, we could 10x your deposits, essentially. And he said, oh, we don't care at all about how much we have in deposit. We need to lend more money. So our interests weren't aligned at all.
Yeah. But
it was interesting that, the negative of this is basically that the teller, if you ever walk into a brick and mortar place anymore, they'll give you a funny look, and they'll probably try and pitch you on opening a couple accounts, but you just, politely decline. But you end up with a fairly large checking account, and you don't even know what it is. You're just going off of, can we go to sushi or are we going to pizza? And you look at your restaurant category, and, are we buying these shoes or are we going somewhere else? You look at your clothing category, and it's all run from the budget. So if you're sharing finances like you've alluded to here, then, both parties have the same data, and they're not both guessing simultaneously, looking at a pile of money in a checking account saying, should I buy this? Should I not buy it? And then feeling guilty afterward if they do, or feeling sad if they don't. But they're both on the same page and just saying, how much do we have here in this very discrete category? And it's perfect information, and you only need to know it when you're making that decision, and then you can kind of move on with your life. It's a great way to manage things.
Leaders are always learning and growing. One of the questions I often ask people at the end of our conversations is, what have you changed your mind on? I've got two questions for you around that, Jesse. First of all, what have you changed your mind on around budgeting? As you've been 15 years into this, what's changed?
Yeah. When I read my old writing, I recognize that I used to really want to dictate what people did with their money. I said, budgeting is important and you should budget for these things. And I've changed my mind on that in a major way. I really feel like it's far too individual for me to say frugality is the thing that, you should pursue, or everyone should do this. And I've gotten much more comfortable with just saying, you budget, you be honest with yourself. And you do find common threads across large populations of what's important. But I read my old writing, I kind of wince, like, oh man, that was a little heavy-handed. And really, you really think everyone should do that? So that's been an adjustment for me. And every once in a while, I catch myself kind of falling back into my very preachy, judgy ways, and have to kind of rein myself in. It's been an adjustment, but a good one, and I don't fault myself for it too much. It's just part of the process, just learn as you go. One of our core values at YNAB is, internally, is that you are open-minded. And we often say, you can change your mind. You are never get a knock against you because you changed your mind. Any organization that doesn't applaud changing your mind and changing your stance on something is an organization ripe for disruption, because they will be so set in their ways, they won't even know what hit them. It'll come from every direction, and that'll be the end of that. So I love that I can argue with my CTO, and then the next day I change my mind and I take his stance, and lo and behold, he's taken mine now, and we're literally we're literally defending what we were just attacking the day before. And we just know we do that, it's a fantastic way to be. So yeah, never punish anyone for saying, hey, I've changed my mind on this. I think we should go this way. That's a sign of maturity and high level thinking and emotional intelligence that I think should be rewarded.
It comes right back to roll with the punches, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and you alluded to this earlier. I mean, when you started this was not going to become a large organization. It was you and Julie and an Excel spreadsheet, and maybe we'll sell a few of these. And now you have a huge team. This has become a really big thing. I mean, I was amazed at how many of our Academy members know about You Need a Budget or have used it. What have you learned as a leader that you've changed your mind on in the last few years?
I could write a book, there's so many. I think the one that's been toughest for me is learning that I'm probably the least fit to do most of the jobs. And there are far more capable, smarter people that will do far better, and letting things go. And, I guess it goes back to the delegation side, but it was very, very hard for me to let go of the product roadmap. It was very hard for me to let go of design input, though I'm no designer. But when it's your baby from the start, you just get used to that, And it was very hard for me to let go of direct management of all of the employees. And now there's a layer or two between me and some of the team. And so it's okay if you feel like, you're feeling resistance against it and it's tough to let things go, but just keep moving in that direction, because you find out there's usually like 10 other more qualified individuals that would do a better job of it. And you just got to get the right people and then let them go, give them autonomy and let them be, and amazing things happen.
Jesse, this has been awesome. If you have been listening to this and thinking, gosh, there's some things here that are really resonating with me, I have 2 calls to action for you. One of them is to pick up the book, You Need a Budget. I think you'll find it fun, some good principles, good humor, but most importantly, some real practical things you can do. The other thing that you can do, if you really want to take the deep dive and do what Bonnie and I are doing, is to try out the software. I think you'll find it is going to challenge you and get you thinking about doing these 4 things, and also really encourage you to do it regularly. Jesse, folks can go to the website. Is it youneedabudget.com or YNAB.com? Actually, I don't know.
Either one. We got both. So
nice.
One of them.
And there's like a 34-day free trial, and people can try it out. And I'd encourage you to do that because it's really worked well for us. And it is the first time we've had financial software that we've not found like we're making compromises with all the time. So thank you so much for that. So I encourage you to take one of those 2 actions. Jesse, thank you so much for your time and for creating this. It's really been a huge help to us, and I know it's going to be help to others too.
Thank you very much, Dave. Thanks for having me on. And I'm just happy that you're a happy user, and glad to be here.
Thanks a ton, Jesse, for sharing the 4 rules with us. Bonnie and I have really found the rules to be helpful in our own budgeting over the last few years, and You Need a Budget System's worked out great. Whether you use their software or not, I think you'll find that these rules are going to really help you to take control of your money. And if you are looking for more on this, several related episodes to today's conversation, one of them I'd recommend is episode 207, How to Transform Your Limitations into Advantages. Back on that episode, I had Mark Barden as my guest. He was here talking about his book, A Beautiful Constraint. The genesis of that book is that your limitations can be some of your biggest strengths as far as generating creativity and driving you to excellence. I have thought about that conversation a lot over the last couple of years. And if you find yourself in the situation of thinking a lot, gosh, if only I had insert whatever here, the resources, the budget, whatever, I think you'll find that conversation to be really helpful in getting you to think differently and also potentially take advantage of the limitation you've got in front of you. Episode 207 is one to definitely check out for that. Also, related to today's conversation, I'd recommend episode 322, How to Manage Your Money. Jill Schlesinger was my guest last year, and we talked about some of the big picture items that we didn't hit on today. We talked about insurance, we talked about investments a bit, and just some of the overall things that all of us should be thinking about in regards to personal finance. Jill is the host of the Better Off podcast. I listen to that one every week as well. It is a fabulous show on personal finance, and Jill is an expert in the area and has been for many, many years. Episode 322 is a great complement to today's conversation. And then finally, I would recommend also episode 337, 6 Tactics to Achieve Extraordinary Performance. On that episode earlier this year, I had Morten Hansen as my guest. He is a professor at Berkeley, has done a ton of research on how people learn in organizations. And in particular, in that episode, we talked about the concept of learning loops and how you can change your behavior by applying the 6 tactics that he's uncovered his research. Another episode I continually come back to myself. I've listened to it a couple of times in the last few months. I've integrated a lot of the things Morten talked about in his research into some of our work with our Academy members. If you are looking to change your behavior, which of course a lot of us are when we're doing personal budgeting, but we're also looking for that in our leadership development, episode 337, definitely worth you checking out as well. And of course, you can access all of these past episodes and many more in the online portal. It is a free access. If you set up your free membership on the website, you'll be able to search by topic. There is a finance and budgeting topic in the podcast library, as well as personal leadership and many other areas that relate to today's conversation. The best way to get access to all of that is just to go over to coachingforleaders.com. You can activate your free membership right away if you haven't already. It's going to give you access to all of that, my book notes, the resources online, everything I archive and send in the weekly leadership guides, the weekly leadership guides themselves coming on Wednesdays, and also, if that's not enough, the free audio course, 10 days, that is titled 10 Ways to Empower the People You Lead. It's a great way to get started on the lessons from this podcast over the last several years. And again, you can access all of that just by going to coachingforleaders.com. Set up your free membership, completely free. You can start really getting into the portal there and exploring everything that's available to you. Hey, thank you so much this week to the Magic Viewer and Bob Furby in New Zealand, Good in Hong Kong, and Heifer Forbes here in the States. All of you left very kind reviews on Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much for doing that. I read all the reviews. They're all helpful to me in affirming some of the things that are working, also for suggestions on things that will continue to improve the show. You can always reach out to me on the website as well, too. If you have a moment to leave a review for the show on the Apple platform, I always appreciate that. Just go to coachingforleaders.com/Apple. Have a great week and see you next week for our next regular episode. Take care.